as I say, it's today's topic all about the dunes in the Delta, Namibia, and Botswana. Our amazing, it's more than just a safari, and I'll tell you all about it in a second and what you can expect on this trip that's a little bit different. A couple of words about Wheel and Anchor, what we're all about. So we are a travel community, obviously also a tour company, a licensed tour company based in outside of Toronto. You know, I've been putting together trips for Canadians for the better part of 32 years, dating myself a bit there. And the reason that we put Wheel and Anchor together is because what I found was that when you get a group of people who travel together that have a bit of a like-minded view of how you should travel, how you should interact with the locals, how you should behave along the way, and just the type of people, the vibe, if you will, is very different than if you just join you know, a trip from a big company, particularly one that's located over outside of Canada. It's a whole different atmosphere. And so we have, over the past 5 years, in fact, our 5-year anniversary is coming up at the end of April, you know, it's been quite a challenging time. But at the same time, we've been successful on our mission of bringing travelers together from all across Canada. I'm here now in Sicily, and ironically, I was in Tuscany when I did this a year and a half ago for the last time we were presenting this program. And yeah, with a wonderful group of people, and you know, this is really what we're all about. Our mission in terms of the experience that we want to offer for you as our members of this very Canadian travel community is becoming well-traveled, well-connected, going to places that are a little bit out of the ordinary. And, you know, let's face it, travel, you know, there's all the common places that we go to, but it's the way that we do it, the way that we curate it, the places we stay, the kind of restaurants that we dine in and so forth. It's a bit different. And I think if you've talked to folks that have traveled with us before, they would agree. So it's not just me saying that. You gotta talk to our other members, and as I say, and becoming connected to the people that you travel with. And so many of our members have come back. I know a number of the ones that are coming with us next month to this Namibia and Botswana trip of 2023. There's a bunch of people that already know each other, and so that's part of the fun. Is that you know, and even if you're somebody that's new to us, you can come in and immediately feel welcome. So that is what the experience of traveling Wheel and Anchor is all about. Joining me today, so my name is Gordon, for those of you who have not met before. I'm the founder of Wheel and Anchor, a very avid traveler. In fact, I'm almost never not traveling. My wonderful colleagues, Paula and Barb, who are the ones that have a fabulous reputation of getting everybody set up on our different trips and making sure that you're well looked after when you're going to join us on one of our trips. And Jackie, who is actually not joining us today, she sends her regrets. She is off in the bush of Africa somewhere, but she is a person who I've worked with over the years. Amazing knowledge of safaris across Southern Africa. So she sends her regrets. But I was chatting with her just the other day, and so she wishes she could be here on the webinar today, but she's off in the bush of Africa somewhere. So today we're going to take you through some of the most incredible landscapes that not just Southern Africa, as far as I'm concerned, the world has to offer. You know, between the dunes of the Sossusvlei in Namibia and the delta of the Okavango, which is a huge portion of Botswana. There's really no other place like these in the world. And so I'm going to be taking you on a little journey today through all of this in anticipation of our trip happening next month for those coming along, but then more importantly for the one that's happening a year from now, with the hopes that we'll get a bunch more members to join us. So let me give you the quick overview on the map. So of course you can see what countries that we're talking about here in the southern part of Africa. So there's South Africa, Cape Town, Johannesburg is sort of up and around where the T is in South Africa on the map. It's not shown there. It's actually the primary gateway to all destinations in Southern Africa. And so you can fly into Windhoek, which is where we start our journey. Here, the capital of Namibia. You can fly directly from Frankfurt, Lufthansa. They do have a direct flight. But I know a lot of people end up coming in through Johannesburg and then over to Windhoek, again, depending on where you're coming in from in Canada and how it is that you put the journey together. But we won't get into the specifics of that. As I say, we will start in the capital of Namibia here right in the smack dab in the middle of Namibia. And just, have an overnight there, get a little bit caught up on the jet lag. It's a long journey. We will fly by chartered aircraft down here over the northern part of the Kalahari Desert to right into the so-called Sossusvlei, which is on the very western part of Namibia, inland from the Atlantic Ocean, in the midst of these sand dunes. And I'll show you all the pictures in a minute, but part of what makes this trip particularly special is the fact that we have a couple of these chartered flights. Well, there's a few throughout the whole trip that allow you to experience the dunes of the Sossusvlei from above. And I tell you, it will be one of the most moving sights that you've ever seen. So we fly into the Sossusvlei, we spend a couple of nights there. We then take another chartered plane up the Skeleton Coast to Swakopmund, which is a German settlement. Namibia used to be called German Southwest Africa. So it was a colony of Germany until, I don't remember how long, but some post-war in any event. And so there's a lot of German influence you'll find up here. From Swakopmund, we travel overland, fairly long journey up to the Damaraland, which is now getting still north central part of Namibia, and Twyfelfontein, where we have the art paintings, the cave art. From here again overland up to Etosha National Park, a big salt pan in the northern part of the country, then over to Onguma, which is a private reserve, overland again to Caprivi. So this is a very narrow strip of land that you see, that part of Namibia that separates Namibia between Angola and Botswana. And then from Caprivi, which will give us a taste of the Okavango and what that whole delta biosphere is like. We then travel one more leg down to Maun, which is a sort of a main economic center in the Okavango Delta, and then we fly into our two safari camps by, again, private aircraft into Camp Morembe, as well as into the Okavango, Camp Okavango, and then back to Maun and home for those that are finishing the journey there. And then we have an extension program that takes us by private aircraft into Kasane in the eastern part of Botswana, and then down to Victoria Falls in Cape Town for the last part of it. So that gives you that sort of the geographic overview of our itinerary. And now I'm going to give you a little bit of a taste of what we're going to experience on a day-by-day basis. So as I mentioned, we start off in Windhoek, which it's not the most exciting capital city in the world. I mean, Namibia is the actually least densely populated country in Africa. It's only got 4.5 million people. And so you get a taste of that as we fly over and drive through. You drive hundreds of kilometers without seeing anything. It's fascinating. And Windhoek is sort of like the quintessential capital of such a country, in the sense that it's very quiet, sort of a provincial town. It's got the political history of Namibia in many ways similar to that of South Africa. And so without going into the detail of all that, because I just want to give you the overview, you know, it's a really nice place. It's a very safe city, a good place to hang out. We have a beautiful luxury hotel that we stay in. And so for those that are anxious, and I think a couple of our members this year are flying in a day or two early, because why not relax and get sort of caught up to the time zone before embarking on our safari journey. So as I say, we'll start off in Windhoek, and then the next leg, as I mentioned, we fly by chartered plane. And when I say chartered plane, we're talking about here the actual aircraft that we have are only allotted to us based on the number of people in our group overall, and what's available, you know, in the days leading up to our flight. So we don't exactly know what it is. It's going to be somewhere between a 6 and a 12-seater airplane. So more than likely like a Beechcraft or a Cessna Caravan. holding up to a maximum of about 12 passengers, because that's all that they can land on these small airstrips in the middle of the countryside. So the flight from Windhoek down to Sossusvlei is about 45 minutes or so. It's not that far, but what you will see in the last half of the flight, as you go over the highest sand dunes in the world, will absolutely blow your mind. This is a landscape that is otherworldly, for lack of a better word. I have not done this flight. I've done this by land, looking up at these incredible sand dunes. And I swore that one of the things I would like to do in my life is do a fly-in safari through the over the dunes, or a hot air balloon, which is an option that you can do while you're there, to take in all of this from the air. It is really, really amazing countryside. We have a beautiful lodge that we're staying in just outside the park gates. And so, what we do there is, first and foremost, you are taking in this scenery of these dunes that are as high as about 340 meters, about 1,000 feet high, the highest sand dunes in the world. And so we will go first thing in the morning. And so this trip is not ideally suited for people that like to sleep in, because the best time to have some of these experiences is early in the morning. So we'll be up before sunrise, so that we'll be inside the park, among the first people there, witnessing the sun rising and the colors, and the pure silence. This was one of the things that struck me about being in the Sossusvlei, is that it is so quiet, because there is wildlife down at the bottom of the dunes and so on, wandering around, but there's a peace. There's no better peace, I think, than in the desert. It's just incredible, and you will really get a sense of that. We'll have the opportunity to climb up for those that wish, and you should, if you're somebody that likes to embark on something like that, probably a few rounds in Stairmaster would suit you well, or walk up and down a condo. Because, as I say, imagine being in a sand trap on a golf course, and having to walk up 1,000 feet of that. It's quite a trek. But Big Daddy, being the tallest of the sand dunes, offers itself to visitors who want to make the trek to the top, and I can tell you, it is worth it. It's worth the climb. So driving around, again, you see also a bit of a salt pan, which we'll also see in the north of the country, up in Etosha. It's the whole atmosphere of this area is otherworldly. Again, we'll see some animals around, potentially more, the grazing type animals like antelopes and the kudus and all the rest of those kind of creatures. But this isn't the place that we're on the safari. This is really all about this amazing places. For me, one of the best places that I've ever visited. And you get a shot of the hot air balloon safari, which we offer as an option, which may or may not be of interest, because again, we're flying both in and out of the Sossusvlei, so we will get that experience from above. But I know from having done this with members in the Serengeti, flying on a hot air balloon above these kind of landscapes is, it's just something that you'll probably only do once in your life, and will be well worth it if you decide to join us for that. So I say we have a beautiful lodge. The lodges that we have throughout are, private, fairly high end, not the highest end, but definitely on the higher end of the spectrum. Super comfortable places. And again, these are hand-picked guide companies that we use, really wonderful guys that will, or women that will give us a great insight into the nature, the ecology of this area. So, as I say, a couple of nights that we'll spend in the Sossusvlei, and then we'll go up by charter flight. I see a few questions have come in. We will address those at the end, just because I have a lot to go through and I want to sort of keep my rhythm here. We will, as I say, fly up again about a half an hour up the so-called Skeleton Coast. So we'll be both flying and driving up the Skeleton Coast. It's so named because for two reasons. First of all, the coastline is very torrential. It's from a navigation standpoint. So you'll see shipwrecks lining along the coast, but you'll also see the carcasses of whales dolphins and other sea creatures. So, which is why it's aptly named the Skeleton Coast, and it is an amazing place to visit, to see both from the air as well as from the ground. And when we pull into Swakopmund, this is a very interesting community because you know, when you walk around here, you feel like you're in Germany. In fact, a lot of the people still speak German as their mother tongue. A lot of the buildings have sort of a German design and architecture to them. So it's a little bit like in Germany. And so we'll take a break here sort of for part of the day and spend a night exploring the town, maybe having some schnitzel, something that reminds us of Germany. And then we'll head north overland. And here we will embark on our vehicles that will be with us all the way from here, from Swakopmund, until we reach Maun in Botswana. And so we're going to be traveling in, you know, high-end safari vehicles. So typically like Toyota Land Cruisers or Hiluxes that have been retrofitted. They're sitting on, you know, very high suspension, bucket seats, typically 5 or 6 passenger seats in each vehicle, big size sliding windows, pop-up tops. So if you've traveled, if you've gone on safari in South Africa before, because this will be a question that some of you have, you know, in East Africa, they use closed vehicles. So these will be more like the ones that you use in East Africa with a pop-up roof. So you can lean out the window, you can stand up on the top, bucket seats, very comfortable, because we are going to be driving some fairly long distances, but you can stand up, pop up to get, you know, great photography. So really perfect for this kind of a journey, because some of you who may have been on safari in South Africa will go, oh, but in South Africa, they all use open vehicles, which they do when they go on, you know, 1 to 2 hour game drives inside a park. But if you're driving the kind of distances that we are, we're going to cover a couple of 1,000 kilometers over the course of this trip. You want to be in a more comfortable vehicle, which is why we specifically selected these vehicles for this trip. So we'll drive from Swakopmund up the coast. I've done this drive myself, actually, some 10 years ago. It is amazing. We'll see what's called the Matterhorn of Africa, which is a mountain. I can't even remember the name of it. And you can kind of see it off in the picture there. Very different landscape. And so the geology here, you get these sand dunes, these mountains that sort of melt into the sea, and then imagine that you see almost nothing. You will drive north to Cape Cross. There's an amazing seal colony there. I remember there's a little restaurant. I think I stayed overnight there, if my memory serves me correct. And we'll go up into the so-called Damaraland, which is known, amongst other things, for their desert elephants, which is a rare form of elephant that's adapted to the desert. They also have desert adapted lions, rhinos, and other animals, but these, you know, are more difficult to see. If we're going to see anything, it'll be the desert elephants. We'll certainly be out on the lookout for them. On the way, we're going to stop at Twyfelfontein. Twyfelfontein is a town that has the largest collection, if you will, if you can put it that way, of rock paintings, rock engravings. And these are significant because they date back, some say, to 20,000 years ago. So, I mean, we're talking really, really old stuff. The whole area is obviously a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And, you know, for those that have been to Egypt and seen the hieroglyphics and all the rest of this kind of stuff, I mean, there you're talking about, you know, 4,000 BC. We're talking 10, 20,000 years ago that these paintings have been in existence. So it is an incredible thing to be able to witness and take in, and the sheer volume of them on top of that. So, and all the stories that go along with that. So this is, again, one of the very special parts of the trip that we're going to experience. Once again, and I'm not showing the pictures of all the luxury safari camps that we're staying in. You'll see some pictures in a minute. They're all terrific. And they're all sort of a more or less similar quality, depending on the parts of the country. They're all detailed in our program itinerary anyway. From here, we continue north again. And, you know, when I say long drives, as I say, from Swakopmund up to Damaraland, we're talking about 450 kilometers. So it's a full day trip with obviously many stops along the way. And then from Damaraland up to Etosha, it's a little bit less, as I recall. But you know, again, we're talking about a few hours of drive, passing through all kinds of different scenery. I mean, the landscape really changes as we move into the north. And Etosha is one of those places that, again, unless you're somebody that's really sort of delved into safari in Africa, is not terribly well known, even though it is, as far as Namibian well, a game reserve, it's not a game reserve, it's a national park. As far as Namibian national parks is concerned, it is the one. It is the equivalent to Kruger in South Africa, but very different. And part of the reason that it's different is because Etosha is a salt pan, and it's not large, so it's nowhere near the size of Kruger. It comes in at around 20,000. I've got the number here somewhere. I think it's about 22,000 square kilometers. Sounds like a lot, but as far as game parks in Southern Africa is concerned, it's not that big. But what makes it special is that, and we're there at an optimal time because we're there towards the end of the wet season, and so during the wet season, all the rains collect into these pools, and then it gradually evaporates, and because of the high salt content of the earth, the water becomes salty, and of course it attracts all the animals. And I remember when I drove into the Etosha Park the first time, I swear to God, I drove through the park gates and arrived at the first salt pool, and looking something like what you see in the picture here, and within 15 minutes I'd seen 4 out of the 5 big five. It just blew me away. So in terms of a concentration of wildlife, my experience was that it was way better than what I experienced in Kruger, where you drive forever. It seems like you drive the whole day. You're going to finally spot that, spot that rhinoceros, or spot that, leopard, the more elusive of the creatures. But I got 4 to 5 in 15 minutes driving through the gate. So we're going to spend 3 nights in the Etosha National Park area. The first night, we're going to be on the very west side of the park. That's going to give us a whole day to drive all the way through Etosha, which, again, it's not huge, but the opportunity there is that we get to drive around through the park. And rather than being close to the entrance, because being a national park, it's all national. Inside the park, the only lodges are government-run lodges, and they're okay. I stayed at one of them before, but we're staying at private places outside the park in Onguma on the east side of the park, for example. It's a beautiful spot, and as it said in one of the slides earlier, you get a lot of predators here. You get a lot of lions here, but you see giraffes. You see them all. And you can imagine a pool of water, and you've got all this collection of animals. It's like right out of a Disney movie. It's amazing. So the diversity of the wildlife here is what makes Etosha really quite special. The lodge itself, Onguma, this gives you a sense of the kind of experience that you have there. A bush lunch with maybe a couple of cocktails, watching the sunset over this very flat. It's like you can see forever, like big sky country, like they used to say about the plains of Western Canada and the US. Beautiful country, comfortable accommodations. And again, this is one aspect of the different biospheres, if you will, that we'll pass through. We'll drive from Etosha, from Onguma specifically, then north. So here we're heading towards the Angolan border, and we're going to hit Caprivi. And Caprivi, if you remember the map, is a very narrow strip of land between Namibia and Angola. And that it's a strip of Namibia between Angola and Botswana. There's a political history why they have this very narrow strip of land, but it's a very proud aspect of their country, because most of Namibia is quite dry, and it's dunes, and it's flat, and it's grasslands, and the Kalahari Desert and all the rest of it. But the Caprivi Strip, as it's called, is very lush, and this is sort of like the semi-tropical jungly part of Namibia. And so why it's, first of all, it's the gateway for us to get into Botswana, and second of all, I think it's important to see the difference in the landscape here. And so we're going to spend a day and a night here in Caprivi on our way to Botswana, and Oh yeah, and again, the interesting thing about this area here is that we can see some very unique animals that are endemic to this area, specifically the Sitatonga, or the red lichway. These are a form of antelope. They're found nowhere else in Africa. So for safari lovers who are looking to sort of check off their list of animals, that's one of the benefits to being in Caprivi. And Bwabwata National Park is the primary national park, again on the Namibian side of this area called the Caprivi Strip. So we then cross the border. We're going to drive all the way down now to Maun. So a fairly lengthy day. It's going to be about another 450 kilometers down to Maun, which is one of the larger urban settlements in Botswana, and it's the gateway to the whole Okavango area. The Okavango Delta, which is where we're going to spend the latter part of this trip, is one of the largest inland deltas in the world. I don't even know the numbers, but it's gigantic. And so it is mostly water-based. There's very few roads in this area, and the roads are, particularly this time of the year, we're going the end of the wet season. The wet season is impassable by road. So the lodges that we're going to two inside the Okavango, the first of which is Camp Maremi. These are only accessible by air. So we fly in from Maun. So we're going to leave our safari vehicles, say goodbye to our guides who will have taken us from Namibia all the way through to Maun. And we're going to fly into the first of two lodges, this one being Camp Maremi. And Camp Maremi is an amazing place. It sits on the edge of Vakanaka Lagoon. And so for those, if anybody is joining us for this year's trip, this is a little bit different. On this year's trip, we're going to Savuti Lodge. So it's similar but different. We have managed to secure these lodges are special because they only have 12 tented, luxury tented rooms, if you will. And so it's not easy to get the space. That's why we have this space at this time, because that's what we could get. But we're not compromising at all. I mean, these places, just to give you a sense, because I'll tell you what the trip is going to cost overall at the end. But I mean, these places are basically about more than $1,000 Canadian per person per night. So this is the standard that we're talking about. This is the ultimate in safari accommodations in Africa. And as I say, so Maremi, situated on the Zakanaki Lagoon, you've got teak and ebony trees. They even have wild dogs visiting the camp from time to time. The beauty about Maremi is that you've got a whole mishmash of ecosystems that found within the reserve here. And so from our sumptuous accommodations at Maremi, we're going to be going out both by boat and to some extent overland. It all sort of depends on the weather. It depends on a number of factors. And we go out and do our traditional game drives, which, as I say, could be by boat, they could be by land, they could be by walking as well. So we'll do stuff on foot, knowing that every evening you're going to come back for cocktails and sunset, sitting in an environment like this, and having rooms that look like this. This is the way to do Africa. Quite frankly, and yeah, there's not much else to say. So we'll spend a few nights, 3 nights at Camp Maremi, taking in all that it has to offer. We'll then make the next hop. We'll fly over to into the actual Okavango Delta itself, which, as I say, is one of the world's largest inland deltas, and basically impassable by road. And then we'll spend the next few nights at Camp Okavango, which again, here you get a taste of it. You are in a absolute oasis of paradise inside this incredible delta. With when I was talking to Jackie about this, because I've not had the pleasure of being at Camp Okavango before, I'm looking forward to it very much. But the beauty of getting up in Botswana in the morning is that you have this symphony of sounds of bird life, of animals, elephants off in the distance, and the squawking of God knows whatever creatures are parading around during the evening, and then the fresh air, the sage, all of those. It's a multi-sensory experience that you have in Botswana, and so Camp Okavango has all the amenities that you can expect. It's even got a nice little swimming pool, outdoor dining. Everything sits up on stilts because, again, remember, we're in a delta. So when you wake up, you'll see that the water level, particularly in the morning, rises up. And being at the end of the wet season, we'll be practically in what looks like a swamp. And so depending on, if there was rainfall during the night or whatever it happens to be, it may go up or down. But at this time of the year, we're going to be doing most of our game drives by boat or by what's the name of the dugout canoe, which is called a Makoro, and a very cool way to go on safari. But hey, look at the rooms. I mean, the pictures are worth more explanation than I can lend to them. I mean, the accommodations are really, really terrific. It's an experience like no other. And as I say, you're going to go out. We either have these motorboats, that have the canvas tops over top them, so you get a little protection from the sun. And you'll go out on your game drive by boat. We'll see a lot of water-based animals. We'll see the hippopotamus. We'll see the rhinoceros. If we're lucky, we'll see the crocodiles, elephants parading around, various other water creatures, and then birds. Absolutely tons of them. And this is what the Okavango is all about, quite frankly, is the diversity of the wildlife. And here again, you get a photo of the Makoros, the dugout canoes that the locals still use to get around. I mean, this is their primary form of transportation because, you can use motorboats in sort of the main channels, but if you really want to get off the beaten track a little bit, you need to go around in these dugout canoes. So that will pretty much round out our experience of Namibia and Botswana. At that point, you're not going to want to go home because you're going to have been surrounded by the most incredible countryside that you may have ever experienced. So from there, we'll take you back to Maun, which is when the first leg of the trip, the main part of the itinerary, will end. For those of you who've already done South Africa and you've done Victoria Falls, you can catch a flight back to Johannesburg from Maun, and then from there to wherever it is that you're continuing your journey onwards. But we are offering a extension program to Victoria Falls and Cape Town for those who wish. And so in that case, we will fly from Maun to Kasane, which is up in the very northeastern part of Chobe National Park in Botswana. And then we'll go overland about an hour's drive, crossing over the border into Zimbabwe and going to Victoria Falls. And so Victoria Falls, this picture sort of says it all here. Again, the season for visiting Victoria Falls is ideal because it's the end of the wet season, so that you'll see this incredible waterfall in all of its glory. It is a narrow chasm that's long, and the delta of the Zambezi River, rushes over, and it's just incredible. So our extension program to Victoria Falls will spend a couple of nights here. There's a number of different things that you can do while there. I personally highly recommend visiting it on the helicopter trip because you get this view. And when you have this view, well, there's not much else for me to say about it, but you can visit it on foot. To go down to where you can see the railway bridge that crosses over the Zambezi River here, that crosses from Zimbabwe into Zambia. You can also, as I say, walk over to the edge of the falls. We'll also do a boat trip up the upper Zambezi River, where we'll have a lovely sunset cruise with cocktails and staying at a beautiful high-end lodge right in Victoria Falls on the Zimbabwean side. From Victoria Falls, we then take a direct flight down to Cape Town. Again, for those who haven't been, Cape Town is really a magnificent city, one of my favorites anywhere. This is an iconic picture where you can see the iconic Table Mountain in the background, the city itself. So we'll be staying right down in the center part of town, near the so-called V&A waterfront, which is the safe part of town. Of course, Cape Town is large and it's has a very diverse population, but it's a beautiful city to visit. And you can't visit Cape Town without doing a trip up Table Mountain, of course. by cable car and getting those stupendous views over the Atlantic Ocean. And of course, we'll do a trip down to Cape Peninsula, the Cape of Good Hope, which is obviously it's actually not the southernmost point of Africa, most people think, but it's the most famous point at the south of South Africa. Here there's an amazing penguin colony that we visit along the way. We drive up Chapman's Peak Road from Cape Town to get to Cape Point, and we hit the lighthouse up there. And all in all, it's just an amazing day. And weather permitting, we could even take a bit of a swim at Boulders Beach near where the penguin colony is. The water in Cape Town, if you haven't been there before, is pretty damn cold. But the one place where it's sort of palatable to swim is in and around Boulders Beach on the way back from Cape Point. We'll also make a trip up into the Cape Winelands, South Africa, obviously so famous for its wines, and the best of the best come from the area around Stellenbosch and Franschhoek. The scenery here is just amazing. One day I'll plan a hiking trip through the mountains here, because it's always taken me aback every time I've had the pleasure of being around Stellenbosch and Franschhoek, otherwise known as the French Corn. We have a lovely, quaint little, it's not a B&B exactly, but it's sort of a historic inn that we're staying in there. And needless to say, there'll be lots of wine tasting and exploring this really, really magical and colorful countryside that is such an iconic part of South Africa. And so, yeah, after that will wrap up our overall trip. So yeah, I've covered a lot of ground here. It's quite a big trip. So I'll just touch on some of the additional information, and I'll get to all the questions that are there. First of all, the price tag for all of this, the Dunes in the Delta program, Namibia and Botswana coming in at $19,790. It's not an inexpensive program, but if you have checked out safari lodges in Southern Africa, you'll know that it's pretty much bang on, because that's just what it costs to go down there. The nice thing is we don't have many single rooms available, but for those who are traveling solo, the additional price is actually very, very reasonable, but there are only a couple of rooms available because they limit us. If you were listening to my newsletter from a couple of weeks ago, we have they will only let us put in so many single rooms. So keep that in mind. Of course, as I described in there, pretty much everything is included on this program once you arrive there. So all of your accommodation at the lodges and hotels with breakfast, and in the safari lodges with breakfast, lunch, and dinner at Sossusvlei, Moremi, and Okavango. All the game drives, of course, and we'll have our own driver guides from when we leave Swakopmund all the way until we arrive in Maun, and then we'll have the lodge naturalists and guides that will be with us while we're at Camp Moremi and Camp Okavango, and the services of our wheel and anchor host from Windhoek all the way until we depart from Maun. Our extension program for Victoria Falls and Cape Town is shown here, again with a pretty modest single supplement. And again, this is for the portion of the trip, including the flights to get us from Camp Okavango up to Kasane, as well as from Victoria Falls down to Cape Town, and 2 nights in Victoria Falls, 3 in Cape Town, and then 2 in Franschhoek. So this program is a whole extra week at really, really lovely accommodations, as I mentioned. And so we will have our own tour leader in from Kasane through Victoria Falls, as long as we have a group size of at least 4 people go on the extension. So this extension will be operated basically on an independent basis. So if only a couple of people show up, we can still have this itinerary as shown here. So the only thing that you have to look for in addition, pretty much, I mean, there's some pocket change here and there, but the hot air balloon flight that is shown here if you want to fly over the Sossusvlei dunes, and of course your airfare and all that stuff, and of course insurance, which is critical. And we'll counsel you on that, because it's important you get the right kind of insurance for this kind of a trip, because not all insurance companies cover this because of how remote it is. But Paula knows more about that stuff than I do. And yeah, airfares, as I say, there's a number of different ways to get there. On the topic of airfares, I just want to say really quickly, because this has come up a number of times from our members, there's no rush to get there. So honestly, if I would fly, if you're flying to London or to Frankfurt or Amsterdam or one of the, the connecting cities, book it, spend a night or two, get caught up on your jet lag there before you come in, rather than sort of going back to back and, ending up with 17, 18 hours of flying time over a day period. I mean, that's just exhausting. So, but this will give you a sense of your airfares into Windhoek and out of Maun, just to give you a sense based on what they currently are there, and who knows. For those of you who have participated in this webinar and anybody who books, we are offering, again, this is something we're trying to do, if we, by tying up the accommodation with these lodges earlier on, then we're able to secure a little bit better of a deal if we get our deposits in well in advance. So our early bird special for this trip, $500 per person, if you book this trip before the end of June 2023. And quite honestly, we have a limited allotment of space, and these kind of lodges book up pretty quickly. So quite honestly, we will probably have to close this trip for sale by the end of the summer, just because the rooms will all be sold. So this is the kind of thing you need to book well in advance. And now it's time for the Q&A session. But of course, if there's any other questions that you have, or you don't want to pose on the webinar, drop us an email, give us a call. And now I'll take all the questions, and I see lots of red dots on my screen.
I tried to keep them
all the questions.
No worries. Yeah, I've tried to keep them all in the Q&A box so we can keep track, because the chat was busy today. Paul had a question here with regards to a ballpark figure on the flights from Toronto to Johannesburg. So you did touch on that in economy, Paul. If you're wanting more than that, I would say to reach out to us. But he's also asking, besides passports, are there any other documents needed?
Yeah, so you do need, for Namibia, Botswana, there's no visa requirement. So you're good there. If you're going to go on the extension program to Victoria Falls, you do need a visa for entering Zimbabwe. It's relatively easy to get. And if my memory serves me correct, you can even get it on arrival. So I don't even know if you need to book in advance, but we'll confirm that to you. But that's about it. So for South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, no visa requirements in place there.
Okay. And yeah, we'll have an additional information document which will also detail all of this out, so we can share with anyone that is interested as well and wants to dive in further on these types of details. Perfect. Mark was asking how long we spend in Victoria Falls, which you also did cover. So we had 2 nights there.
Correct. Yeah, it's 2, 2, and 3. So 2 nights Victoria Falls. We will arrive already in the early afternoon of the first day. And I believe the flight is out in the afternoon. So you'll have a half day, a full day in Victoria Falls, and then another morning, again, depending on the flight schedule, which is generally enough for Victoria Falls. By the time you do the helicopter flight and, you go up to the railway bridge and you sort of snap some photos from the different things, there's not a ton more to do. When I went to Victoria Falls, I spent 2 nights there, and it was about right.
Perfect. Great. I realized as well, we missed a part of Paul's question. He was asking about the length of the flight. So I don't know if you want to touch on that in general.
To the transatlantic, or
I think for the whole route, like one way, which obviously depends what airline, layovers, and where you're coming from.
Yeah, it depends where you're coming from in Canada, but you can basically count, if you're coming from Toronto as an example, generally speaking, there are no more flights. South African Airways unfortunately went out of business during COVID. So there are no more direct flights from North America to South Africa. So you've got to fly from Canada to Europe. Typically London, Frankfurt, Amsterdam are the most common gateways to get to Southern Africa. But if we use Frankfurt, because that's one where you can fly direct to Franschhoek. So Toronto, Frankfurt is about 7.5 hours these days. And from Frankfurt down to Windhoek is about 10 to 11 hour flight. That's what you're looking at.
Yeah, perfect. And yeah, many are doing the via Frankfurt, I believe, on this year's trip. Perfect. We've got more questions here. So Chris was asking about if we're able to drive off-road in the national parks.
So it depends which national park. So in Etosha, you can drive off-road to some extent. They don't necessarily allow you to drive through the middle of a salt pan because that, you know, so there are some restrictions on it, but Etosha, for example, is relatively open for that. And in Sossusvlei, it's relatively open for being able to drive anywhere. In Botswana, it's much more restricted. And it's partly because it's a delta. So to the extent that you're driving around, you're, you know, it's dangerous because you could be in a swamp. And so in generally speaking, at Camp Marembe and Camp Okavango, first of all, they don't allow night drives. So that's one thing you won't do in Botswana. And that's pretty much common anywhere in the Okavango. And you cannot go off-roading. So they're limited to very specific roads. But a lot of the experience in the Okavango is by boat anyway. So there's no such thing as off-roading. It's all off-road.
True adventure. Awesome. Chris had another question here with regards to, are the sand dunes only located on the coastal areas?
The Sossusvlei dunes run all the way down the coastal area. So yeah, you don't find them I mean, it's not right on the coast. So it's not like when you stand on Dune 45 or Big Daddy in Namibia, you can't see the coast. You're still a couple of 100 kilometers anyway, but the dunes stretch, if you look at a map or Google Earth, from inland and go out to the coast. But that's the only place you find them. You don't find them in the inland of South Africa or Botswana, where it's a completely different biosphere.
Perfect. Another question here. Can we give an idea of additional vaccination requirements from Jane?
Yeah, so vaccinations is very subjective. So you know, for example, you know, yellow fever is if you visit Zambia and then you travel to South Africa, you would have to get a yellow fever vaccination. But from Zimbabwe to South Africa, to my knowledge, you don't require a yellow fever vaccination. So it's a little bit subjective. Anyway, I don't want to get into it on the webinar because it's something that first of all, I recommend you look up online. You can go to the canadatravel.gc.ca, the Canadian Foreign Affairs site. That gives you some indication. And then what we always say on this topic is consult with your physician, or with even better, a travel medical clinic for your specific situation. So I know what I do, which is probably less than what others do in terms of vaccinations, but it's all a little bit subjective because there's a whole host of them that you could take. What's necessary is a different matter. Yellow fever is about the only one that you may require an actual certificate for. The rest of it is at your own discretion. Let's put it that way.
We do also, in our additional information document, there are links as well to all of these websites that Gordon is referencing for you to educate yourself and then consult with a medical professional of a travel medical clinic if you so choose.
Yep.
Would be our suggestion. Perfect. We have someone who is looking for a companion, so a solo traveler, just putting it out there. If anyone else is interested, you can reach back out to us.
For sure. But if you are a solo traveler, if you look at those single supplement prices, and if you book quickly, because I don't think those solo rooms will stay, we do have a couple available, and they are very reasonable in terms of what single supplements typically are for trips. So, you know, that's a good thing. But we do have our companions for the road program. We do have a lot of people in it. So if you are a solo traveler and you would like to share, it's kind of fun to share. And the rooms are generally huge in these safari lodges. So it's a kind of place where you could share. Yeah, so.
Perfect. Chris had a question here for us asking about how many travelers members will be on this trip.
Well, that's a good question. It will, I would say, almost definitely not exceed 16 because there aren't many more rooms, or certainly rooms that we have on allotment on this trip. I believe we have a maximum of 16. This year we're going with 12, I think it is. Is it 14?
I think 14.
For 12 or 14. So this year we're going with 12 or 14. So that's kind of the numbers you're talking about, 12 to 16 people. 10 would probably be, 10 would probably be the minimum. So somewhere between 10 and 16 people is what we'll go with on this trip.
Perfect. Another question here. If someone was interested in the extension program and wanted to do Victoria Falls, but not carry on to Cape Town, is that possible?
I believe that's possible, yes. We will have to get back to you individually on that. We don't generally break these things up, but if you're literally just doing that, then I think it's well within the
We can
reason.
look into that.
Yes.
Perfect. And then, yeah, it sounds like Chris has maybe, and Sandy have already been to South Africa. So I'm assuming this comment about they highly recommend the helicopter tour for anyone that is going down there, and to dress as if you're going to get wet if you do the tour of the falls.
Yes, that is very true. So you know what, I didn't talk about weather. I'll just address it briefly. We're at the end of the wet season. It doesn't rain a lot at this time of the year, but it can rain. The weather generally, it's cool in the evenings. You should remember that. So it's, you know, the evening temperatures are generally sort of 12 to 15 degrees, particularly in the Sossusvlei in Namibia and up into Maraland. If you go inland to Botswana, it's a little warmer at night, but still you're talking about the mid-teens. So there's no air conditioning, but you don't need air conditioning in these places. During the day, you're going to get up to, in Namibia, probably the low 20s. In Botswana, more like the mid-20s is probably what you can expect temperature-wise.
Perfect. We had another question that came in the chat. Let me just go back to it because it didn't get entered in the Q&A. It was with regards to someone who's maybe not been to the southern half of Africa and was wondering, haven't been to the east or south, and whether we would suggest going to Namibia and Botswana as their first safari.
Yeah, I wouldn't dissuade anybody from going in on their as their first safari. By no means. I mean, you know, this is a very well organized company, safari through organized by Jackie, who I've worked with for many years, and so for sure. And you know, this is a higher end program, so you have very comfortable accommodations. So it's not like it's a prerequisite to go to the other parts. I wouldn't say that at all. Yeah, I wouldn't say that at all. It's just a different experience because Namibia, Botswana, you are really out in the bush for that whole time. Like, other than visiting Swaziland and that brief, you know, couple hours we're in Maun, you are nowhere near civilization the whole time. So as long as you're aware of that, it's comfortable. You're well looked after, but you're not anywhere near civilization, and we will not have internet for a good part of the time, like the whole time we're in the Okavango, you know, so you have to be prepared to be offline. If you're in other parts of South Africa in the Kruger National Park, you can get Wi-Fi in anywhere, and, you know, 20 safari trucks everywhere you go. So it's just a different experience.
Perfect. That so far has covered it for now. And any questions that come in after, you can reach out to Barb and myself offline. Garden
Okay, cool.
will post our contact details.
Yeah, fantastic. I saw one other trips from Wendy saying, will Gordon be on the trip? That is a good question. I cannot honestly tell you that this far in advance. I am accompanying this year's trip. Next year is still a year away, so I can't promise that. But I'll take that question as a compliment.
And yeah, many have been asking about our other hosts, and we've been getting a lot of good feedback about our hosts. So
yeah, our people love our hosts. So whether it's Amber or Alfie or Rose or Todd or Paula, you will have an amazing time. So it's yeah, the host is not consequential. My other colleagues are at least as good, if not better, at hosting as I am. So have no fear.
Perfect.
Good deal. All right. I think we're done then.
I popped the link for that video in the chat as well,
yes,
Gordon. I don't
thank
know
you. Just the last point, I forgot to mention it in Botswana. If you want to watch a documentary, a very well done documentary by a French couple, Derek and I forget her name, Joubert, who did a documentary about the predatory environment that exists between the lions and the elephants and so on. They've spent like the better part of 40 years studying it down there. An incredible documentary in the chat box. Check it out, because that's the other thing that I think sets this trip apart, you know, particularly in the Caprivi, particularly in parts of the Okavango is that you get the opportunity, and you know, it's everybody would love to see a kill while they're on safari. That's like the thing, but to actually see one happen is a very, very, very rare occurrence. But I've never seen one myself. I've seen one just after it's happened. I've seen one just before it's happened. But to see that, the likelihood that you're going to see that kind of a situation, and I tell you the energy that everybody feels when you're witnessing nature at its, whatever you want to call it, most extreme, is amazing. And the chances are much higher here than you'll find in other major safari areas. Good, we'll leave it at that. If you have any other questions, drop us a note. We'd love you to join us. I say this trip has a relatively short window of time that it'll be available for. So please do drop a note if you'd like to come along. And thank you for joining us. It's going to be an amazing trip. And I'll report back to you in our newsletter in a few weeks' time. To the extent that we have internet, I will let you know how it's going on our trip this year to Namibia and Botswana. Take care. Have yourselves a great week. And we'll catch up with you on our next webinar, which is about Sicily, which will be next week, which is where I am now. So my greetings from Sicily. Take care.